Honor governs every dimension of life in the Mediterranean world. This is particularly evident in the Gospel reading for the 14th Sunday of Ordinary Time, where Jesus is in his own country, that is, the Galilee, specifically Nazareth or its vicinity. Mark chapter 6, verses 1 through 6. Jesus departed from there and came to his native place, accompanied by his disciples. When the Sabbath came, he began to teach in the synagogue, and many who heard him were astonished. They said, "Where did this man get all this? What kind of wisdom has been given him? What mighty deeds are wrought by his hands? Is he not the Tecton, the son of Mary, and the brother of James and Joseph and Judas and Simon? And are not his sisters here with us?" And they took offense at him. Jesus said to them, "A prophet is not without honor except in his native place and among his own kin and in his own house." So he was not able to perform any mighty deed there, apart from healing a few sick people by laying his hands on them. He was amazed at their lack of loyalty. One's basic claim to honor in the circum-Mediterranean and Middle Eastern social worlds derives from birth and is determined by the circumstances of birth. Technically, this is called ascribed honor.
All right, honor. Honor is relatively simple, actually, to understand. Honor is your standing in the pecking order of the village, together with the public recognition of that. There is no such thing as claiming honor that the village does not recognize. To claim honor that the village does not recognize is to be uppity, brash, a braggart, a fool. Honor is public reputation in the village, and everybody in the village knows exactly where you stand in the pecking order. The reason for that is there are two primary ways in which you can get your honor rating or ranking in a village. The overwhelming way in which you get your honor rating is from your birth. It's what anthropologists call ascribed honor. It's the honor that you get the day you pop out of the womb. It's the honor that you and every member of your extended family has, male and female. Everybody in your family has always had, and always will have. That kind of ascribed honor means that if you are born in a very high family, you have a high honor ranking. If you are born a low life, you have a low honor ranking. And you're probably going to have it till the day you die. So the overwhelming way in which you get your honor is from the family of your birth.
In this gospel episode, the people are fully aware of Jesus' ascribed honor. Is this not the Tecton, often mistranslated as carpenter, the son of Mary, the brother of James and Joseph and Judas and Simon? And are not his sisters here with us? These family members help identify Jesus' proper honor rating, which act as a roadmap showing everyone where exactly Jesus should fit into his society.
Now you have the map that tells everybody where you fit in the pecking order of things. And that has an enormous impact on your life. Your honor ranking determined who ate with whom, who could marry whom, who spoke to whom, who listened to whom. It determined who would speak first in a conversation. It determined who would marry whom and who would do business with whom. In fact, it determined most of the social patterns of your life. It's therefore critically important that everybody in the village know exactly where you stand, because it provides the roadmap for how you and I are going to interact with each other. So, for right now, the overwhelming way in which you are going to get your honor ranking is from your birth, ascribed honor.
Of particular interest in this list is the statement that Jesus is the son of Mary. This is very unusual. In the Middle East, a son is always identified by the father, like Simon Peter was. Simon bar Jonah, Simon the son of Jonah. Or James and John, the sons of Zebedee. But identifying a son by his mother's name is weird, very strange. This is actually an insult, folks.
The oldest gospel we have is Mark's gospel. If you go to Mark's gospel, chapter 6, he's in Nazareth, and he teaches there in the synagogue, and after he sits down, everybody says, "Wow, where did this guy get this? What mighty words and works are his. Wait a minute, isn't this the carpenter? And then what? Son of Mary." How are you identified? When would you identify somebody by the mother? When you're not sure who the father is. Now, Mark seems to have preserved this piece of information that the villagers knew. Nobody knows who your father is. They're not very sure. How does Luke do this? Luke is the great whitewasher. Luke's Gospel, chapter 4, and it's, "Is not this Joseph's son?" Oh yeah, that's Luke. One last passage in John. And they're having a big argument, and who's your father, and so they say, Jesus says, "You really can't come from Abraham as you're claiming that you're Abraham's progeny because you're not doing the things Abraham did." And they said to him, "We were not born of fornication. We have one Father, even God." Yes, well, you could say, well, that's a lie, and it's possible. On the other hand, it's also possible it was known that his origins were dubious. Here in John it says, "We know your background. Why are you telling us we're not Abraham's? Come on, we know something about you." So that's the whole story.
To identify Jesus the Son by his mother's name signals that there was some confusion about who exactly his father was. They don't know. It's kind of a polite way of mocking Jesus as a bastard. The anonymous author we call Luke needed the Gospel of Mark in order to write his Gospel. He depends on Mark. The author we call Luke corrects Mark's report in this episode. He removes any hint of scandal by identifying Jesus as being Joseph's son. This is another fine example of showcasing the phenomenon of developments in an ongoing tradition. As a tradition ages, it gets more polished, more sanitized, and more explanatory comments are added. A second important point is the crowd's identification of Jesus' status. He is a tekton, an artisan. In the Middle Eastern social world, a son is expected to take up his father's occupation or profession. And there is zero expectation of anybody doing better than your father or mother, or getting ahead in life. There is no such thing as upward mobility in the ancient biblical world. Honor requires that persons remain in their inherited status, their ascribed honor, and they make no effort to improve upon it, which would be shameful. Jesus is a lowly village peasant artisan. He is not a teacher and was not expected to be that way. If he behaves like that, if he behaves like a holy man, if he behaves like a teacher, then he is out of place and doing something quite shameful.
You don't get up and speak in public in the Middle East unless you have a very high honor ranking. Jesus comes from a no-account little village. He's a village, a tekton he's called in the Greek. We translated carpenter. Could be a worker in metal, stone, or wood. I don't have time today, but to show you just how low on the social scale that really is. It's very near the bottom. People like that don't get up and talk in public. So when Jesus does, it confuses everybody. In the Middle East, they expect somebody born of a great family to be great. You're born of a low family, you're going to be no account. What does not compute in their social compass is somebody born to a low-life family who turns out to be great. How do you explain that? Well, of course, what Matthew and Luke do to explain it is they give us these very elaborate birth stories in which they try to tell us that God was somehow unusually involved in this birth. Otherwise, there could be no expectation that anybody would listen to Jesus. What do his opponents do in the 20th chapter of Luke? They say, "Who gives you the authority to speak like this?" Note that they didn't say, "Did you have this authority from your birth?" They know that's not true. Who gave you this authority? Their assumption is somebody, he had to have acquired the honor from somebody who recognized it, because all honor has to be publicly recognized. And of course, Jesus plays a little word game with them. He turns around and asks a question back. He said, "You answer my question, I'll answer yours." Questions are always challenges in public. Think about all of the times people bring questions to Jesus in the Gospels. I discovered in the Middle East that when you're a professor, students are not supposed to ask you questions. It's a challenge. And of course, if they do ask you a question, you don't know the answer, you lie. You do not want to appear in public not knowing.
Scholars have shown recently that synagogues in the first century are not the later places of worship we know from our Jewish friends. They were more like Israelite male hangout places, where political texts like the Torah and Isaiah were recited to discuss the present problems of the day. But they were not places of worship. If a qualified teacher were to come to a synagogue, teachings could happen there. Teaching in the synagogue was permissible to such qualified males. Peasant artisan Jesus' teaching is so impressive that the men there were astonished by his words. Many who heard him were astonished by his teaching and moved by his mighty deeds. They seemed ready to grant the honor Jesus was claiming by his striking teaching. But the ultimate judge and bestower of achieved honor throughout the circum-Mediterranean and Middle Eastern worlds is the crowd. And the crowd stops short and refuses to concur. To begin with, Galilean Jesus is recognized as a craftsman, as an artisan, a tekton. That is, a worker in wood or stone, but wood was scarce and precious in ancient Palestine. Stone was more plentiful. Craftsmen like Jesus, especially those who lived in tiny hamlets like Nazareth, had to leave home in order to find work. Please don't think they were always going to work in building projects. Often they would be seen standing in village squares begging for work. And the work provided could be picking grain in the fields. Jesus often worked as a day laborer. He had to, in order to survive. Now the fact that Jesus, the tekton and day laborer, one of the ergatai, had to leave home, leave his village Nazareth, to enter other villages to find work, meant that he had to leave his women, in Jesus' case, mothers and sisters, other workers like him, their wives as well. People like Jesus had to leave them at home without requisite male protection to safeguard the family's honor. For this reason, artisans like Jesus were viewed as persons without shame, that is, without sufficient sensitivity to the requirements of honor. Put another way, all starving poor peasants who worked outside their villages, like Jesus, were considered social deviants. Secondly, where could a person born to a manual craftsman, assuming that Jesus actually had such as a father, gain such astounding wisdom? Even more, how could a craftsman, presumably busy at his craft, ever obtain such wisdom? There were no schools in the Galilee, and so they took offense at him. The Gospels indicate that the historical Jesus was a shrewd man of his culture. He could readily size up a situation and respond with a perfectly appropriate comment. In the vast majority of instances, the perfectly appropriate comment is an insult. I know we like to think of Jesus as nice and sweet, but the Romans would never crucify such a fiction. Jesus was a Mediterranean master of the insult, and throughout the Gospels, Jesus handedly demonstrates that he is such. Just take a look here. Anticipating that the crowd is not going to grant him honor, Jesus takes the offensive. He quotes a proverb to those who wanted to shame him, saying, "A prophet is not without honor, except in his own country, and among his own kin, and in his own house." With one fell swoop, Jesus insults his neighbors, his relatives, and his family. Yes, including Mary. He shames them all before they can dishonor him. This may be shocking to Catholics and Eastern Orthodox to read this passage and other passages in Mark, to see how the Markan Jesus treats Mary and his blood relatives. But the fact is that the Gospel of Mark does not present Mary positively. The depiction of Mary, which is the earliest one we have, is quite negative. In fact, if our knowledge about the mother of Jesus only came from the Gospel called Mark, we could never have developed later Marian devotions or a theology of Mary. We need Luke and John at least for the basis or foundation for a trajectory of images of Mary that are positive enough to develop such. Now, the Markan Jesus' point here in his insult against his neighbors, his relatives, and family like Mary is this: outsiders are better able to determine the honor rating of a prophet, one who speaks the will of God for the here and now, than insiders, the people who should know him best. This message would resonate with people in the Markan Jesus group who lived generations after the historical Jesus. Nearly everyone in that community, perhaps every single person, did not know the pre-paschal Jesus. They had encountered him in alternate reality, altered states of consciousness, in meetings in their Jesus group. And yet passages in this gospel remind them that they are actually closer to Jesus than people who actually knew him prior to his resurrection. The author called Mark does not tell us how the crowd responded, but we can well guess that Luke's report is right on target and culturally plausible. According to Luke, the crowd was so enraged that they wanted to kill him. Because Jesus' neighbors, relatives, and family could not extend to him emotion-filled loyalty, Godfather-style loyalty, commitment, and solidarity, that's what we translate as faith in traditional English translations. Jesus could not perform for them the mighty works, the shamanic healings that he did for others. Self-inflicted problems are the worst.